Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard and welcome to Tournament War Room, where I try to keep you up to date on what happened over the course of a tournament weekend. So, we had a couple of tournaments happen this weekend, both the Mastering Runeterra and the Online League Series number 24. I only grabbed the numbers from the Mastering Runeterra because it was the much larger event, both in terms of players that entered as well as the top cut representation, and the OLS actually had a pretty simplistic top cut with 4 Lysandra and 4 Nasus making up a majority of it, and then I think a couple of rogue aggro decks. Not a lot to be gathered from it, just because I do like to look at tournaments that are 64 plus players, and the OLS did only have about 40. So instead we are going to be focusing on the Mastering Runeterra tournament, which, as you can see here, had a massive influx of Nasus as well as Lysandra. It is worth noting that over the course of the tournament circuit so far, no deck has actually been able to crack more than half of the top cut. Here we have 5 out of 16, we have 3 out of 8, we have another 5 out of 16, and then all of a sudden we skyrocket Nasus and Lysandra to 10 and 9 respectively. What this means is that these decks are very powerful and will continue to be very powerful going into the seasonal. You should be aware of Nasus and Lysandra, have ban strategies regarding them, and potentially play them in your lineup. Now, the cool thing about both Nasus and Lysandra is that there are lineups that will beat them. This is not a tier 0 format by any stretch of the imagination. That said, Nasus is a little bit harder to directly counter than Lysandra. Nasus is actually pretty comparable to Shen Fiora in that it has a lot of close to 50-50 matchups. And a lot of things that handle certain parts of the deck don't handle other parts. For example, Invoke handles the Nasus part very well. It doesn't handle the Blighted Caretaker, Cursed Keep, or General Shadow Isle package of Nasus particularly well. And at the end of the day, it is just a big atrocity deck, and that kind of is what it is. Now, Lysandra does beat Nasus, that's all well and good, but Lysandra really is the target ban of the format. Nasus has been what's been let through more often, but we could see that flip going into the seasonal. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the analysis. That will be coming on Tournament Tactician, which normally comes out Fridays. I'm pushing for it on Thursday this week, but I did just get my COVID vaccine, and I heard that it kind of puts you on your ass the day after the fact, potentially, so I might just be out for all of Wednesday, in which case it probably won't be Thursday, but you'll find out. Follow me on Twitter, casterboulevard, and you can find out when it actually does go live, or just subscribe to me here. Ring that little bell, get the notifications. But other than that, everything kind of stayed the same. Because this was the first weekend of Nasus, we didn't really have too many people bringing counter Nasus lineups, and as such, you still see the other decks that you would expect to here at the top. You know, we kind of fall off a cliff after the Nasus Lysandra numbers, really cementing them as the 2 top decks of the format, and then we get into Discard Aggro and Demacia Aesol, which were the 2 decks behind Lysandra on the previous week. So this makes sense. These decks are still pretty good. You know, and then once again, just a slew of kind of one-ofs and things like that. Now, obviously, as you can see here, there is a bit of a gap. We are really starting to consolidate the format, and we had just about as many decks in a top 16 as we did in a top 8, especially compared to Duels of Shurima's top 16. Duels of Shurima was all over the place. Now we are really cemented on what the seasonal tournament is actually going to look like meta-wise. Now, I do also want to show you what some of these decks looked like. So, the Lee Sin deck that actually won, so the lineup that won was Lee Sin, Thresh Nasus, and Lysandra, and I expect that to be a very decent lineup going into the weekend. There were actually 7 lineups that were Thresh Nasus, Lysandra X, and the only 2 Lysandra decks that weren't with Thresh Nasus were paired with Deep. Thresh Nasus, Lysandra X definitely seems to have taken over the Demacia Aesol Lysandra X, and it is much more popular than the Lysandra Aesol Demacia lineups ever were, and I think that these lineups are very good. While you do get a very powerful lineup in Lee Sin, Lysandra, Nasus, you do have a lot of exploitable pressure points. Lee Sin can get targeted, Lysandra can get targeted, Nasus can get kind of soft targeted, but because Nasus really just rose to prominence, I think that it is possible for Nasus to get hard targeted, and we just haven't figured that out yet. But I wouldn't worry too much about getting hard targeted in a seasonal. I would worry about playing my game, saying these are the 3 decks that I'm most comfortable with. But I do want to show you what the lineup of the winning player, Lord Vaughn, did look like, because his builds were a little off-kilter. This is his Lee Sin deck. You might notice that it's not running Mountain Goat or anything like that, and Gifts from Beyond is back in here. And we're really on this just solidly anti-aggro Gifts from Beyond plan, and then, of course, relying on the Lee Sin to come out and win us the game. Not the most wild Lee Sin list we've ever seen, but definitely not quite the standard. Where things really start to differ is the Thresh Nasus list that we ran. So, if you've seen Thresh Nasus before, you know that this list has been pretty standardized. No one's playing Rite of Calling, we're kind of down on Rites of Negation, Withering Wail and Vengeance are absent, and then you throw in Bakai Reaper and Bakai Sandspinner, and that's where you start to get a normal list and cut the Undying. The Undying's not normal. And that's what a pretty standard list looks like. So, the Withering Wails and the Vengeances really came out as anti-Thresh Nasus tech from Lord Vaughn, and he was the only player in the top 16 running a list like this, and it did phenomenally. all you need to do is tech your Thresh Nasus for the mirror and decide I'm going to ban Lissandra, or you do the opposite. You say, hey, I'm going to ban Thresh Nasus. I'm going to bring some decks with game against Lissandra. What we're really looking to do this weekend is ban one of the power decks, Lissandra or Nasus, and bring a lineup that has good matchups into whichever one we're not banning, but has game against everything else. I'm not sure where to put aggro, actually, because aggro was very absent from this top cut. There were no spiders. There was very minimal aggro, really, because Lissandra and Nasus are both decks that kind of directly counter aggro. You know, Nasus originally popped up as a tournament-winning lineup for Sorry in an LBR Open Series, or a Brazil Open Series, rather, because he wanted to run anti-aggro. He ran into a lot of aggro, and he was rewarded for it. So when the standard for the format is Nasus, Lissandra, X, and X is probably going to be a deck that at least has game against aggro, for example, Lee Sin, while Lee Sin can be exploited by aggro, it's a little bit dicey because there is a very good chance that the lineup's going to be like Nasus, Lissandra, and then, say, Draven Ezreal or Demacia Aesol. You know, something that has a little bit more game against your aggro deck, and it's not going to be a good look. So I am actually really curious to see how that one turns out, because earlier in the format, this was the first time in a long time that we were seeing aggro win tournaments. And I know people always think new set just dropped and there's a big set. Of course, we're going to go back to aggro. But historically, that's not what's happened in Legends of Runeterra. This was the first format where we get into aggro. And now at the end, aggro is suffering for it as we get a very organic counter aggro lineup. And then I believe the Lissandra deck was nothing special. This one, I mean, there was like a Grasp of the Undying. But for the most part, it's a pretty normal Lissandra list. Now, the other deck that I wanted to mention was from second place player Bulat, who brought Frostbite midrange. I think that Frostbite midrange is very well positioned into both Lissandra and Thresh Nasus, having a difficult to avalanche board, things of that nature. Like I said, there are a lot of decks that have game against Lissandra and Nasus, and you could bring a lineup that bans the third deck and just says, I would love to play against Lissandra and Nasus all day. I don't have a lineup like that quite nailed down, but this isn't the video for that. This isn't the analysis video. This is me simply reiterating to you what happened over the course of the weekend. So Frostbite midrange is definitely a deck that I have my eyes on. There was only a 1 represented in Top Cut, but it did make it all the way to second place, and of course has game against the Lee Sin as well. So that's what we're looking at, folks. We got Nasus Lissandra as the absolute dominating force in the format, and then you just pick your X third deck. Aggro is not doing well. You know, it's kind of fallen off a cliff a little bit. We still got a little bit of Nightfall aggro in here, a little bit of Lucian Azir, and outside of that, you know, there's no pirates, there's no spiders, there's nothing like that. Discard's up there, and it's sort of the sole pillar for aggro at the moment. But that is going to do it for this week's Tournament War Room. Just wanted to keep you caught up on what's going on and give you a baseline so that you have an understanding of what I'm going more in depth on in Tournament Tactician, hopefully on Thursday, might be Friday. Can't say for sure. Would love to get it out for you a little bit earlier. But for now, it is Tuesday. I have a cast. The LRA will be happening tonight. If you want to catch that, it will be on twitch.tv/JDozagG at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So if you're watching this video after that, it's already gone. You can go check out the VODs, though, and we are seeing some high-level action there, seeing a lot of interesting decks throughout the LRA, and I will be back on Thursday to give you a more in-depth breakdown of what we should be expecting at the seasonal and how you can counter it, ban strategy, all that good stuff. Until next time, everybody, thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournament.